This is their reverse psych move, trying to turn your caution into proof you're paranoid. But now we have the independent assessment plus witness support. Don't be afraid. Hearing that, I felt like I just stepped out of a trap. That night, I sat on the porch as the cool breeze ran through my hair. Florence brought over some fresh-baked pastries. We ate and talked. She said, "Gloria, I used to be scared like you, but I realized every time they try to manipulate me, I get more evidence against them. Let them perform. We'll record it. When we're in court, the truth will show itself." I smiled for the first time in months. It wasn't a shaky smile. I suddenly understood instead of being hunted, I could become the witness for my own truth. Before bed, I wrote my journal. They think they're cornering me, but their mind games are exactly what helped me see their nature more clearly. I'm not swayed anymore. I have evidence, allies, and faith. I closed the notebook and lay my head on the pillow. For the first time, sleep came easy, not because the storm had passed, but because I'd learned how to stand steady in it. Just 1 week after the call from the social worker, I received a thick envelope stamped by the local court. My stomach dropped and my hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a petition to verify civil competency against me. Right in the first line, my name, Gloria Whitman, was in quotation marks, like I was a character without substance. The plaintiffs were direct relatives, signed by Benjamin Whitman and Carrie Whitman. I read it over and over, feeling like someone was squeezing my chest. The reasons were shamelessly absurd, that Mrs. Whitman has recently spent money irrationally on useless things, that she isolates herself and shows signs of depression and paranoia toward family, and finally, that there was a risk of outsiders exploiting and manipulating her assets. I let out a dry laugh that sounded like metal scraping metal. So, the very people who'd lived off me for years dared to dress me up as a victim of exploitation. The next morning, I took the petition to Mr. Harris's office. He sat quietly for a moment, drumming his fingers on the wood desk. "Gloria, this is a serious escalation. But don't worry, I've been preparing. We'll prove this is a fraudulent filing." He opened a cabinet and pulled out the materials we'd gathered: bank statements, receipts, the money demand texts, and Dr. Moore's assessment report. Stacked together, they looked like a fortress. Harris analyzed carefully. "Their weakness is fabricated evidence. I'll ask the court to verify the source of everything they submitted. If we expose even one false piece, the whole case collapses." I nodded, feeling a new surge of confidence. This time, I wasn't just defending, I was counterattacking. As predicted, when the court sent over their file for us to review, Harris spotted something odd. There was a medical certificate signed by a psychiatrist named Kramer, claiming I had signs of memory decline and needed long-term monitoring. Harris checked the medical database and found that this doctor had retired 3 years ago. The signature on the paper was clearly fake. I went numb, staring at it. They forged medical records?" Harris answered firmly, "Exactly. That's our strike point. Submitting forged documents to the court is a serious offense. Once we prove it, they won't just lose. They'll face legal consequences." In the days that followed, I devoted all my time to organizing evidence. Every evening, I spread out files on the dining table and labeled folders by topic: bank, texts, forged medical, neighbor statements. Florence often came over to help. She patiently read each message and reminded me to stay calm. "Gloria, think of it like cleaning out an old attic. The more dust there is, the lighter you'll feel when it's finally swept clean." One afternoon, Harris called, voice electric. "Gloria, I just spoke directly with Dr. Kramer. He's willing to testify in court that the signature is fake. This is pivotal. Their mask is about to fall." I gripped the phone, my heart nearly leaping out. All that pent-up grief finally had a chance to be brought into the light. While we waited for the hearing, Benjamin and Carrie kept up their routine, swinging between emotional bribery and threats. One day, I got, "Mom, if you drop this, we'll let everything go and be like before." Another day it was, "If you're stubborn, don't blame us when the whole family hears about your madness." I didn't respond. I put every message into a separate folder labeled Manipulation Tactics. One evening, a call came from an unknown number. A woman's voice said she was a legal staffer assisting Benjamin and Carrie, wanting to come to my house to further assess your health. I laughed. "If you want to assess anything, talk to my attorney. I don't let anyone into my home unless I invite them." Then I hung up without a tremor. I knew the closer we got to court, the bolder they'd get. The first hearing finally arrived. I wore a light gray suit, my silver hair neatly pinned, and a touch of makeup. In the mirror, I saw an older woman who stood steady, no longer prey, no longer trembling. Harris went with me, and Florence came to testify. When I entered the courtroom, I saw Benjamin and Carrie across the aisle, faces tight. Carrie avoided my eyes. Benjamin glanced up and then stared at his lap. The hearing began with the plaintiff's side. Their attorney leaned hard on phrases like mental instability, irregular spending, and asset protection. I sat still, listening quietly. When they presented that medical certificate, Harris stood immediately. He asked the court to compare it with Dr. Kramer's official records. Moments later, Dr. Kramer entered, thin, white-haired, eyes sharp. Holding up the paper, he said clearly, "This is not my signature. I have never met Mrs. Gloria Whitman, nor have I written this report. I retired in 2020. Whoever used my name on this committed forgery." The courtroom fell silent. Benjamin went pale. Carrie bowed her head, shoulders shaking. In that instant, it felt like the mask they'd built over months was ripped off in public. Harris kept going. Dr. Moore's independent report confirming I'm fully competent. Bank statements showing the money flowing to Benjamin and Carrie, plus the threatening messages and letters. Each page landed like a hammer blow on a wall of lies. I sat there clutching my purse, tears rolling, but not from sadness. They were tears of release. At last, the truth stood in daylight. When the hearing paused, the judge said more time was needed to reach a final decision, but the exposed fake medical record had already tipped the scales my way. As I left the courtroom, I heard the whispers. Unbelievable! Her own son forged documents to take his mother's assets. I drew a long breath and held my head high. For the first time in months, I stepped into the light, unafraid. Florence squeezed my hand. "See, Gloria, masks fall. They can stage all the scenes they want, but the truth has its own voice." That night, back in my quiet house, I wrote in my notebook, "Today, they revealed their greed and lies before the law. I don't need to prove my love. I only need to prove the truth." I closed the notebook and looked up at the ceiling, feeling calm. The fight wasn't over, but I knew I was on the right path. More importantly, I was no longer a woman blinded by honeyed words. I am Gloria Whitman, and I've looked the truth in the eye. The formal hearing was set for a gloomy Monday morning. I woke very early and sat at the mirror for a long time, my silver hair pinned up, dark circles under my eyes, but a steady gaze. I chose the navy blazer Robert gave me for our anniversary with a simple white blouse. I wanted to appear not as a weak victim, but as a woman who has lived fully and kept her dignity. Florence drove me to the courthouse. On the way, she said softly, "Gloria, today you're not only standing up for yourself, you're standing up for many mothers who've been squeezed by their own children. Remember that." I squeezed her hand, faith rising in me. The courtroom was unusually full. I noticed familiar faces from church and the neighborhood. Some nodded when our eyes met. Across the room, Benjamin sat with Carrie, faces rigid. Carrie wore a black dress, eyes darting down. She wouldn't look up. Benjamin sat straight, lips pressed tight, fingers laced together. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. The plaintiff's attorney launched into more talk of financial risk and protecting an elderly woman from her own confusion. I listened calm, though each word felt like a blade aimed at my heart. Then Harris stood, voice low and sure. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Gloria Whitman, is not unstable as claimed. We have official medical reports, witnesses, and evidence that the plaintiffs used forged documents." He placed a thick, numbered stack on the table. Harris called Dr. Moore. She took the stand with a firm step. "I personally assessed Mrs. Whitman 2 weeks ago. She is fully competent, with good memory and clear logical thinking. There are no signs of mental illness or cognitive decline." The room shifted. I glanced at Benjamin. He frowned and whispered to Carrie. Before they could respond, Harris called the key witness, Dr. Kramer. He walked in holding the forged paper. "This is not my signature. I never wrote a report about Mrs. Whitman. Using my name this way is forgery." The courtroom buzzed. The judge's gavel brought silence. Benjamin had gone white. Carrie shook. The truth they'd tried to bury was standing under oath. In cross, Harris presented 5 years of bank statements, line by line, showing transfers from me to them. He paused at the total, $47,600, not counting cash.
"If anyone needs protection here," he said slowly, "it is Mrs. Gloria, a mother systematically exploited by her son and daughter-in-law." A ripple of whispers spread. I caught someone mutter, "Shameful." Those murmurs tapped like tiny drum beats of agreement, and my heart pounded, no longer from fear. When the judge asked if I wanted to speak, I stood. My legs trembled slightly, but my voice was clear. "Your Honor, I am Gloria Whitman. I've lived 72 years through war, working to support a family, and I never imagined I'd have to stand here to prove my competence. But today, I'm not speaking only for myself. I'm speaking for all the mothers who've been exploited and cornered by their own blood. I'm not crazy. I've just been silent for too long." In that moment, I felt compassionate eyes on me. Harris nodded. Florence wiped away a tear. I knew I just said what so many women of my generation have kept inside. When the hearing adjourned, the judge said, "Based on the evidence presented, the court will seriously consider the act of document forgery. Meanwhile, the request for guardianship over Mrs. Judge Gloria Whitman is temporarily denied." The gavel struck like a bell of release. It was the first slap of the law against Benjamin and Carrie. They left in silence, their bravado gone. I watched them go, feeling both heartache and relief. I never thought I'd see the day my own son's lies were exposed in court, but I also never felt justice so close. Outside, the autumn wind was cool and kind. Florence squeezed my hand. "You did it, Gloria. You stood tall." Harris smiled. "The fight isn't over, but today we won a crucial round." That evening, under the warm lamplight, I wrote, "Today I heard the voice of justice. It doesn't erase the loss, but it gives me faith that truth will win. And I know I'll keep going, however long the road." On the day the court issued the final ruling, I sat in the courtroom, my heart pounding like an old drum. Across the aisle, Benjamin and Carrie sat close together, faces tight. I could see the gray in my son's hair, the hollows under his eyes, but his gaze was icy, nothing like the little boy who once clutched my hand when he learned to walk. The judge read the decision in a steady, low voice. "After reviewing all evidence, the court fully denies the petition for guardianship over Mrs. Gloria Whitman.
Furthermore, the court orders additional investigation into the use of forged documents submitted by the plaintiffs. The gavel cracked against wood, splitting the air. I closed my eyes and exhaled. Months of dread finally lifted. Harris gently placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Congratulations, Gloria, you won." But at the same time, a sharp breath from Benjamin made my chest tighten. He hung his head, then suddenly stood and walked out of the courtroom. Carrie hurried after him, calling his name softly, but Benjamin didn't stop. I watched my son's back recede and felt my heart fracture. I knew I had just lost him, not only in court, but maybe forever. Outside the courtroom, strangers came up to shake my hand and call me brave. Florence hugged me tightly, and Harris smiled, saying I'd set a good example for women in similar situations. I smiled and thanked each person, but deep down the smile was heavy. This victory came at the cost of a break I could never mend with the child I loved most. That night, the house felt unusually quiet. I sat in the living room with the small lamp on. On the table was a framed photo of our family at a Christmas dinner years ago. In it, Benjamin sat beside me, his arm loosely around my shoulders. I touched the cold glass, tears slipping before I realized it. A legal victory couldn't fill the empty space inside me. Memories poured back. The day Benjamin started college, when I held him at the dorm gates. His wedding day, when I arranged every bouquet on the tables. The day Olivia was born, when I stood outside the delivery room, hands shaking as I held a small gift for my granddaughter.
Those were my pride, the reason I worked hard and saved every penny. And now they felt like smoke. 3 days later, Carrie called. Her voice was cold. "You won. Congratulations. But from now on, don't expect to see Benjamin. He doesn't want to look at you anymore." I kept my voice even. "Carrie, tell Benjamin I never stopped loving my son, but I can't let him turn me into an endless wallet." Carrie said nothing and hung up. I sat still for a long time after that call. The pain didn't slam into me. It seeped in like rain soaking into soil. I knew that to Benjamin, I wasn't a mother anymore. I was the one who humiliated him in court. He couldn't see that his own actions drove me to this. In the days that followed, I lived more slowly. Florence stopped by often, with flowers from her garden or something she'd just cooked. She understood my emptiness. She didn't need many words, just sat with me, drank tea, and let the quiet be its own comfort. Harris called to check in, reminding me to rest and not dwell on things too much. One morning, while I was sweeping leaves on the porch, Olivia appeared. She stood at the end of the walkway, hugging a teddy bear, eyes wide on me. Before I could say a word, Carrie rushed up, pulled her away, and didn't let her speak. I stood there, watching that small figure disappear. A tear slid down my cheek. I knew I'd lost not only Benjamin, but any chance to be close to my granddaughter. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote, "I won a battle, but lost a piece of my heart. Justice offers protection, but it can't restore a mother's love once it's cracked." I closed the notebook and took a long breath. Even in the hurt, a small flame glowed. Freedom's flame. I wasn't being forced anymore.
I wasn't living under fear, and I knew this choice, however harsh, had saved the rest of my life. The next day, I went to church. When the pastor asked what I wanted to pray for, I simply said, "Please keep Benjamin safe, even if he no longer sees me as his mother." As soon as I said it, I felt lighter. I didn't expect my son to come back now,
But I wanted him safe, not lost. Leaving church, I looked up at the autumn sky. Clouds still hung gray, but far off. A narrow beam of light broke through. I smiled and told myself I still had days to live and more chances to give love, not to those who use me, but to those who truly need it. The legal victory closed a chapter, but the loss in my heart remains. I won, but I also lost a son. That's the truth I must learn to live with as I continue my path. After the trial, I stayed tucked inside my small house for days. I needed time to breathe and let my heart settle after such heavy blows. Then one morning, Florence knocked, holding the local paper. On page 3 was a long story with a bold headline: Elderly Mother Wins Case Against Son and Daughter-in-Law, a wake-up call on family exploitation. I read every line, stunned and trembling. The article didn't just recap the trial. It spoke to a larger reality. Many seniors quietly drained by their own children and grandchildren. And somehow, I had become a prime example. That week, calls started coming in. Reporters wanted interviews. Women with similar stories asked to talk. At first, I was awkward and afraid. I wasn't used to my private life laid bare. But one night, an older woman's voice shook over the phone as she told me her son had forced her to sign over the house and she was scared to fight back for fear of being abandoned. I went silent, then burst into tears. I realized I couldn't stay quiet. Florence encouraged me first. She said, "Gloria, you have a strength you don't see yet. Use your story to help others. We can start a support group." It sounded far-fetched at first, but something inside me leapt. Maybe this was how to turn pain into something bigger. We started small, a few meetings in the church's community room. I told my story, Florence told hers, and then other women began to open up. Some sobbed mid-sentence, some trembled too much to speak, but their eyes shone with relief. We called the group something simple: Mothers Who Won't Be Silent. Word spread each week. More people came. Some were older women with canes. Some were middle-aged, supporting an elderly parent while being exploited by their own siblings. Even some men came, admitting their children had pushed them into hardship. I listened, my heart aching and warming at the same time. I wasn't alone. A single wound had connected dozens, hundreds of hearts. One day after I finished speaking, a woman named Margaret stood, took my hand, and said, "Gloria, because of you, I refuse to sign the transfer papers my son shoved at me. I'm not afraid of being called selfish anymore. I realize I have the right to live for myself." The room broke into applause, and I felt the bricks of my lonely wall crumble. We didn't stop at sharing. Harris agreed to provide legal guidance for tough cases. He came to meetings, explained how to keep records, how to spot abuse, and how to seek help. I remembered the day he urged me to get an independent evaluation. Without him, I might have lost everything. Bit by bit, our group became a real community. We organized fundraisers and set up a small fund to help mothers cut off financially by their children. We wrote letters to local officials calling for more hotlines for elder abuse and families. And I, once curled up in fear, stood before a crowd and said clearly, "We are no longer silent victims. We have a right to speak." Some nights after a meeting, I sat on my porch, streetlights casting warm gold on the sidewalk. A strange peace filled me. I had lost Benjamin and the chance to be close to my granddaughter, but I found a new family, one bound by truth and courage. I opened my notebook and wrote, "I'm no longer the mother who suffers in silence. I'm part of a community where we lift each other up." Through this community, I found my voice again. I closed the notebook and smiled. At 72, life still had a new chapter, one not soaked in tears, but filled with faith. That summer, for the first time in decades, I lived to my own rhythm. No more mornings waking to transfer lists, no more phone rings like whips. I woke to quiet, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and stepped onto the porch, letting the breeze run through my gray hair. For the first time, each day truly felt like mine. I used my remaining savings to freshen up the house. I painted the scuffed walls a pale blue. I planted more roses and wild daisies in the front garden. I bought a porch swing under the maple tree where I could read and listen to birds in the afternoons. It wasn't flashy or loud, but it was a world I chose. I started traveling, something I'd put off for years. My first trip was a week in New Orleans, listening to jazz and wandering the old brick streets. In the small cafe, a street musician played saxophone, and my throat tightened. Outside the family whirlwind and constant demands, there was music, the sweetness of sugar-dusted beignets and friendly smiles from strangers. When I came home, I painted. The room that had been piled with bills and papers became a studio. Southern landscapes, a portrait of Florence, even a self-portrait with a calm smile, lined the walls like proof I'd found myself. Friends from Mothers Who Won't Be Silent visited and clapped, saying my paintings were full of life. One evening, I visited Robert's grave.
I sat beside his stone and whispered, "Robert, I did it. I'm no longer the woman who bowed her head, terrified of losing her son." I stood up and kept what we built, and more importantly, I kept myself. The wind moved through the trees, and I felt like he was smiling. Sometimes I heard about Benjamin and Carrie from acquaintances. They'd moved to a smaller apartment. Carrie worked full-time at a nail salon. Benjamin bounced between odd jobs. I felt no hatred, only sadness. I once hoped my son would one day understand, but I know now that's not my responsibility. I've crossed that loss and learned to put a period at the end. One Sunday morning after a meeting, Florence said, "Gloria, we're not just saving ourselves. We're planting seeds for the next generation. Their children will grow up in families that respect them because mothers and grandmothers found the courage to speak today." I stood there moved. I never imagined my story could ripple outward like that. Now, as I write this, I'm 73. I don't have many years left. But every year, month, and day means something new. I know how to say no. I choose joy for myself in a morning cup of tea, a park concert, or simply watching flowers bloom. I understand that real love never comes from buying it. It comes from respect and genuine care. I paid dearly to learn that, but I have no regrets. From the rubble, I rebuilt a life from myself. And to anyone listening, if you feel used, dismissed, turned into a shadow in your own family, remember, you have the right to speak. You have the right to live for yourself. It's never too late to begin again. I close my notebook and smile at the bright garden. For the first time in years, the future isn't hazy. It's clear as a summer sunrise. If you've stayed with me to the very end of this story, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for hearing the voice of a woman who seemed fragile but found strength in her pain. I'd love to know your thoughts. If you were in my place, what would you do? Please share in the comments. I believe everyone's story has value. If this touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and come back for the next stories. Your support and presence are the greatest encouragement for me to keep writing and sharing. With gratitude, and see you soon.